Pastore. Boundaries, boundaries, Paul Pastore.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. One of my favorite quotes is by Charles Tremendous Jones, who says, "Each of us will be the same person we are next month, next week, and next year, except for two things: the people we meet and the books we read." And I recently read a book that I think can make you a better parent. It can make you a better professional, regardless of the field of endeavor you're in. And it can make you a better person. The name of that book, by Dr. Henry Cloud, is called Boundaries. Has anyone read that book? Absolutely, positively fantastic book. I'm going to challenge everyone here today to read that book. The first question would be, what is a boundary? And as a real estate broker, it's easy for me to tell you what a boundary is by using an analogy or a metaphor. Most of you probably live in a house. The house has a lot line. In Arizona, many of the lot lines have fences. Those are boundaries. What does a boundary do? It keeps the good things in, for example, your pets and your children. And it keeps the bad things out. Burglars, vandals, hoodlums. Let me give an example. When I was younger, I relished coaching my kids' teams. Spring soccer, fall soccer, winter basketball. They usually competed at the Tempe Y. The Tempe Y had at that time, and probably still does, a zero tolerance policy for fighting. That says, if two little kids get in a fight, you are off the team. No more practices, no more games, no more for that season. Zero tolerance policy for boundaries. What are your boundaries? Do you have boundaries? That's what the book explores. And one of the most important parts of the book says, in order to have a boundary, you need to have a consequence. Because a boundary without a consequence is no boundary at all. Let me give an example. My friend Lisa, who many of you know, is currently teaching a women's study on boundaries. About 2 weeks ago, she was putting together a lesson plan. And I said to her, "Lisa, do you happen to have any zero tolerance boundaries?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what does that look like to you, Lisa?" She says, "I have zero tolerance for drug use." She told me a story 5 years ago. Her husband at the time decided he would renew a teenage hobby he had of smoking marijuana. She said, "Charlie, what are you doing? We have two teenage boys in this house." He said, "But that's my choice." She said, "Well, Charlie, that's my choice too, because I have a zero tolerance boundary for drug use. And you have a choice, Charlie. You're either going to be married to me and live in this house and not do drugs, or our marriage is over. That's your choice, Charlie." Charlie chose marijuana and recreational drug use over the marriage, over the children, and Charlie left. But to Lisa's credit, she had a zero tolerance policy for drug use. Does anybody know who Dr. Ben Carson is? Just recently read a wonderful book called Gifted Hands by Dr. Ben Carson. Strongly recommend that. He has a movie called Gifted Hands also. You may realize who he is when I tell you he was the first surgeon to separate Siamese twins who were attached at the head. He grew up in poverty. He was raised by a single mom. The mom had to support the family. She had 3 jobs doing domestic chores. At one point when he was in grade school, she came home and noticed they were watching a lot of TV. She also noticed that they were getting bad grades in school. She pulled the plug out of the TV and cut the cord. She said, boys, we have some new boundaries here. You get to do 2 book reports each and every week. After complaining, they acquiesced to their mom's boundary. The mom would take the book report, she would make marks on the book report, check the top of each page, and it was years later that the boys realized the mom was illiterate. That's a boundary. I have a friend of mine who I run with. He's having a lot of difficulty with his 19-year-old son. I remember a story that happened at least a decade ago. He told me the next day. He was at Walmart with his son, who was about 8 at the time. His son said when he was at the check register, Dad, I want you to buy me something at the store. He said, I'm not buying you something at the store, son. He said, Dad, I'm not leaving the store until you buy me something. He said, I'm not buying you something. The son would not leave the store. My friend told me the next day, he called up the boy's mother, and he said, what should I do? The boy's mother said, go buy him something. And he did. He bought him a little ball, and they left. When he told me the story, I said, Bob, are you crazy? Are you crazy? You have to have boundaries with children. If that was my son, I would have sat down with him. I would have knelt down. I would have said, Brandon, I love you, son. But here's the deal. Daddy's leaving in 15 seconds, and I'm going to miss you. Here's 4 quarters, Brandon. You can call any 4 people you want to come pick you up, but it's going to be a cold night in the parking lot. My fellow Toastmasters and guests, I'm going to suggest that you read that book by Dr. Henry Cloud called Boundaries, because I believe that that concept of boundaries can give you an easier life. It can make you a better parent. It can make you a better professional. It can make you a better person if you set boundaries in your life, set boundaries for your children, Mr. Toastmaster.